Is it worth the risk to keep on going?
Sure, to win. I mean, that's what we've always done. The money's never been a factor. We raced when we didn't have any.
They didn't call him the Intimidator for nothing. With 76 career wins, millions in prize money, and a legacy etched into the blacktop at Daytona, Dale Earnhardt Sr. was more than a driver. He was an icon of American motorsport. To fans, he represented fearless command, unshakable grit, and Southern racing royalty. But on February 18, 2001, everything changed in an instant. What appeared to be a routine bump in the final lap of the Daytona 500 became the moment that silenced a titan and sent shockwaves through the entire NASCAR world. What happened next was tragic and unforgettable. The final lap, what really went down at Daytona. Dale had been here before. Same roaring crowd, same terrifying speeds, same high-stakes turns. Daytona was Earnhardt's sanctuary. He knew every inch of its high banks like a second home. He had bled on it, conquered it, and lifted trophies above its checkered finish line. But on that February afternoon, he wasn't chasing a win. He was playing Guardian. As the 2001 Daytona 500 roared into its final lap, Dale Earnhardt Sr. wasn't leading the charge. His son, Dale Jr., and his teammate Michael Waltrip were. Earnhardt was behind them, driving defense. He was the shield, blocking, sliding, guarding the inside line. It was a strategic move. High-speed chess with everything on the line. He wasn't racing for glory anymore. He was protecting a legacy in motion. Then came the moment. As the pack surged through turn 4, just seconds from the finish line, Sterling Marlin's car nudged Earnhardt's rear quarter panel. It wasn't brutal, the kind of contact seen dozens of times a race. But at 150 miles per hour, there's no such thing as a gentle bump. Dale's car slipped low, then snapped violently up the track. Ken Schrader was right beside him. The two cars made contact. Then Earnhardt's black number 3 slammed head first into the outside wall. It didn't look fatal, not at first. There was no fireball, no flipping wreckage, just a hard crash. The kind of crash fans had seen Dale survive time and again. But this time, something felt off. Schrader got to him first. He climbed out of his own wrecked car and rushed to Earnhardt's window. One glance told him everything. He stepped back. His expression changed. His shoulders slumped. Later, Schrader refused to describe what he saw, not to preserve mystery, but because he knew he had just witnessed death. Rescue crews swarmed the scene. Earnhardt was carefully removed from the wreck and rushed to Halifax Medical Center. Silence swept across the track. Fans stood still. Pit crews froze. Announcers, usually electric with energy, spoke in subdued, measured tones. No one knew for certain yet, but NASCAR was about to change forever. At 5:16 p.m., the news dropped. Dale Earnhardt Sr. was gone, killed instantly by the impact. The man who had stared down danger for decades was gone. But how? How could a crash that looked so routine claim the life of one of racing's most experienced veterans? The answer lay in the autopsy, and what it revealed shook the sport. The Volusia County medical examiner confirmed Dale Earnhardt died from a basilar skull fracture. It's one of the most deadly head injuries. A break at the base of the skull, often affecting the brainstem. The cause? Violent, rapid deceleration, exactly what happened when Dale's car hit the wall. The crash lasted just seconds. But the physics involved were unforgiving. The report described a ring fracture, encircling the skull's base, an injury that results in instant brain shutdown. In plain terms, Dale died the moment his head snapped forward, then violently recoiled. There was no suffering, no struggle, just immediate, irreversible stillness. Additional injuries included broken ribs, a fractured ankle, and bruising from the seatbelt. Speculation swirled. Rumors of a faulty or modified seatbelt spread like wildfire. Some believed it tore on impact, but those claims were contested. Rescue worker Tommy Probst, one of the first to reach Earnhardt, publicly stated that the seatbelt was intact when he arrived. In the end, it didn't matter. The head injury alone was enough to be fatal. One piece of equipment could have made the difference, the HANS device. At the time, it wasn't mandatory. Dale had refused to wear it, believing it restricted his movement. He wasn't alone, many drivers shared that view. But everything changed overnight. NASCAR launched an immediate investigation. They pored over footage, examined every part of the wrecked car, and consulted medical experts to understand how one of the greatest had died in what looked like a survivable crash. What they found was alarming. The cars were simply too rigid. The wake of Earnhardt's death sent shockwaves through NASCAR, forcing the sport to confront an uncomfortable truth. The walls were too hard. The safety gear was outdated. Speed and spectacle had long been the priorities, but now, the brutal reality had set in. Earnhardt's death made one thing painfully clear: change was no longer optional. And change came swiftly. Within the year, NASCAR introduced sweeping safety reforms. The hands device, once optional, became mandatory. Car interiors were re-engineered to absorb more energy in the event of a crash. Concrete barriers were replaced with safer walls. Steel and foam energy reduction panels that could absorb the brutal kinetic force of a crash, reducing blunt force trauma. Cockpits were reinforced. Even helmets and seats were upgraded to secure the driver's head and shoulders. Dale Earnhardt's death didn't just close a chapter in NASCAR's history, it sparked an entire revolution in driver safety. While nothing could bring him back, every driver who walked away from a crash afterward owes a debt to the changes his loss inspired. The legacy he left wasn't just written in victory lanes, but in the very autopsy report that forced NASCAR to rewrite its rulebook. As news of his passing spread, tributes poured in from every corner of the globe. Fans wept openly at Daytona. Fellow racers donned black armbands. Earnhardt's iconic number 3 car became a symbol not just of racing prowess, but of a painful loss and deep respect. No one questioned his toughness anymore. No one doubted his commitment. He had lived by one powerful creed: that he would rather die in a race car than fade away quietly. And in that, he did just that, leaving behind a legacy that could very well have saved countless lives. For those who were there that fateful day, especially his son, Dale Earnhardt Jr., the pain wasn't philosophical. It was raw. It was personal. To watch your father perish in a crash at 200 miles per hour is a wound that doesn't easily heal. But for Jr., grief transformed into fuel for determination. He carried his father's name into a new era of racing, winning races, earning the title of NASCAR's most popular driver year after year, and fighting for safer conditions on the track. There's something eerie about how Dale Earnhardt died, not because it was a dramatic scene, but because it was so quiet, so sudden. There were no flames, no smoke. Just a man who had withstood everything the sport could throw at him, undone by a single, perfectly timed collision of physics and fate. Maybe that's why the world remembers it so vividly. Because if it could happen to Earnhardt, a driver who seemed indestructible, it could happen to anyone. When Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s death was confirmed, the racing world shifted. It wasn't just about mourning a legend anymore. It was about reckoning with the reality of a sport that had, for decades, flirted with disaster. Crashes were a part of NASCAR's DNA. They were almost expected, but this was different. This was not just the loss of a driver, it was the loss of an icon. And it sent a resounding message: something had to change. Within hours of Earnhardt's death, NASCAR launched an internal investigation. Every piece of race footage was dissected. Every component of Earnhardt's number 3 Chevrolet was examined, from the seatbelt to the telemetry. Nothing was overlooked. It became clear that if Earnhardt could perish in what seemed like a survivable crash, then something deep in the sport's foundation had to be fixed. What they found was disturbing. The cars, designed for speed and precision, had evolved into machines that were too stiff, too rigid. The same aerodynamic design that made them faster also made them more dangerous in the event of a crash. The rigidity of the cars meant that every ounce of energy from a crash was transferred directly to the driver. And the track walls, concrete, hard, unforgiving. When a driver slammed into them, every ounce of force came back, reflected inward. Earnhardt's impact at Daytona's Turn 4 was the perfect storm. It funneled every ounce of kinetic energy straight into his cockpit, and there was no way for that energy to escape. The response from NASCAR was immediate. The Research and Development Center was born, dedicated solely to improving driver safety. The days of treating injuries as a tragic part of racing were over. Consultations with biomechanical engineers, trauma surgeons, and crash specialists began. Safety became the focus. Prevention, the goal. The first breakthrough came quickly: the hands device, now mandatory. It would anchor the driver's helmet to their shoulders, preventing the whiplash that caused Earnhardt's fatal skull fracture. The very motion that killed him would now be physically impossible. Then came the safer barrier. These steel and foam barriers, developed by engineers at the University of Nebraska, acted like shock absorbers, reducing crash forces by up to 70%. The barriers first appeared at Indianapolis, but they quickly spread to all major NASCAR venues. The cars themselves didn't stay the same. The car of tomorrow, unveiled in 2007, featured a wider frame, a reinforced roof, and energy-absorbing materials in the cockpit. The driver's position was moved further from the door to minimize side impact trauma. Roof flaps were redesigned. The roll cages were upgraded. Every part of the car was scrutinized. The question wasn't just about improving performance anymore. It was about preventing the next fatal crash. Longtime fans feared the sport would become overregulated, too sanitized, too slow. Some even accused NASCAR of exploiting Earnhardt's death to justify commercial redesigns. But most understood what was at stake. The loss of one of the greatest drivers of all time could not be for nothing. If Dale Earnhardt had to die, then the least the sport could do was learn from it. Drivers embraced the changes, some reluctantly at first. Many had resisted the hands device, complaining it was uncomfortable or restrictive. But after seeing what happened on that February afternoon, resistance vanished. No one wanted to be the next autopsy report. Crew chiefs, engineers, and even pit crews began training differently. Safety drills became standard. Crash simulations were analyzed in detail. The era of flying by instinct was over. Data was now king, and Earnhardt, though gone, was everywhere. His face remained on merchandise. His name echoed in tributes. His number 3 became sacred. But more than that, his death became the reference point for every safety decision made thereafter. Every new helmet, every revised protocol, every softened barrier carried a piece of his legacy. In the years that followed, something extraordinary happened. The fatality rate in NASCAR dropped to 0. Not one driver has died in a major NASCAR event since that day in 2001. There have been horrific crashes, airborne flips, cars that split in half and burned to the ground. But the drivers walked away, bruised, shaken, but alive. And every single time, someone mentions Dale. To this day, when fans talk about the modern era of NASCAR safety, they do not start with the rulebook. They start with a single name, a single number, a single crash on the final lap of the Daytona 500, because that was the day NASCAR woke up, and it never fell asleep again. The autopsy report, what they found inside the car. The crash was seen by millions, but the truth about what happened to Dale Earnhardt Sr. was sealed inside the wreckage, inside his body, and inside the silence of those who were first on the scene. For weeks, the public wanted answers. Not rumors, not speculation, real answers. And the autopsy delivered them. But those answers were not just clinical. They were devastating. The official autopsy was performed at the Volusia County Medical Examiner's office not far from Daytona. The findings were clear and swift. Dale Earnhardt died instantly from a fatal basilar skull fracture, the kind of injury that almost no one survives. What the report described was not a freak accident. It was a perfect storm of mechanical physics and human vulnerability. The ring fracture at the base of his skull occurred the moment his head violently snapped forward, then backward after the impact with the wall. There was no helmet or seat that could stop that without a head restraint device. And Earnhardt was not wearing one. But the skull was not the only injury. The autopsy revealed broken ribs, a fractured sternum, a left ankle fracture, and severe chest trauma caused by the 5-point harness. The seatbelt itself came under intense scrutiny. Some thought it had been cut. Others claimed it broke on impact. Photos seemed to show a tear. Theories ran wild. NASCAR launched an internal investigation into the belt's integrity. They interviewed safety engineers, reviewed manufacturing specs, and analyzed similar crashes. Tommy Probst, who attempted to resuscitate Dale on the track, stood by what he saw. The belt was secure. But others, including Richard Childress racing team members, said the belt had sheared clean through. It was a mystery that added to the pain. Even the position of Earnhardt's seat came into question. Some speculated it was mounted too low, too reclined. Was it a comfort choice? A visibility preference? Or a mistake that made a lethal injury more likely? The investigation could not say definitively, but it raised an uncomfortable truth. Even the smallest detail can decide the difference between survival and tragedy. The autopsy also answered a question that had haunted fans. Did he suffer? The answer was no. Dale Earnhardt was likely unconscious the instant his skull fractured. Death followed immediately. There was no pain, no struggle. Just silence. And maybe that made it worse. Because the man who had survived fiery crashes, flipped cars, and broken bones, the one who had stared down death more than once, was taken in a heartbeat by something invisible. There were no flames, no impact sparks, no warning. Just a twitch of bad physics at the wrong time. But if you think the report gave NASCAR closure, you would be wrong. It did the opposite. It opened doors. It demanded reform. And it sparked a quiet war inside the sport. A war between tradition and survival. Because the question was no longer how Dale Earnhardt died. It was how many more would die if nothing changed. The fallout from the autopsy report was immediate. NASCAR was already reeling from the public grief. But now it had to face a hard truth. The old systems. The old thinking. It was not enough anymore. Safety in racing could no longer be reactive. It had to be proactive. That meant more than redesigning cars. It meant changing culture. For years, many drivers had resisted safety innovations. The hands device, introduced in the 1990s, was mocked by some in the paddock. Drivers felt it restricted their ability to turn their heads. Others said it made them feel claustrophobic in the cockpit. Dale Earnhardt himself was one of its most vocal critics. He believed racing was supposed to be dangerous, that safety innovation should not come at the cost of performance or freedom. That belief was shattered the moment the autopsy findings were made public. Within weeks, top drivers began wearing the hands device in every race. Within a year, it was mandatory. It is not hard to trace that shift directly to the sight of Dale Earnhardt's black number 3 car hitting the wall and to the cold, clinical conclusions of the medical report that followed. NASCAR also released a detailed investigation called the Earnhardt Report, a 300-page document filled with crash data, forensic analysis, seatbelt tests, and high-speed footage from every angle. It confirmed that the forces involved in the crash were well within the threshold of survivability if the right safety equipment had been in place. The skull fracture could have been prevented. That realization stunned everyone, because if Dale Earnhardt could die in a crash that looked so routine, it meant no one was safe. Every racer on the grid suddenly saw themselves in that cockpit, and every team owner started wondering if their cars might become the next national headline. The report led to the development of what became known as the car of tomorrow, a safer, more stable, more crash-resistant design that NASCAR introduced in 2007. But even before that, smaller changes began to appear. Seat mounting angles, cockpit padding, crash data recorders, new regulations about how harnesses should be worn and maintained, and most importantly, the development of safer barriers at all tracks. And yet, as the industry evolved, the conspiracy theories refused to die. Some fans claimed the autopsy report had been altered. Others believed NASCAR had covered up certain elements to protect itself from liability. There were even suggestions that Earnhardt had already suffered a neck injury prior to the race that made him more vulnerable. None of these claims were ever supported by evidence, but they spoke to the deep emotional impact of the loss. People did not just want closure, they wanted answers. And sometimes, the truth that a seatbelt tore or a helmet was not enough felt too simple, too cruel. In the years since, the autopsy has been revisited countless times. Every anniversary, every big crash, every close call brings it back into public conversation. Medical professionals have praised the transparency with which NASCAR addressed the findings. Safety experts continue to use Earnhardt's crash as a teaching tool, and current drivers credit that moment with saving their lives. The black box data from Dale's car showed something chilling. He never had time to react. His steering wheel barely moved. His feet never touched the brake. The crash was over before he even knew it was happening. And perhaps that is why it haunts so many to this day. Because for all the skill in the world, for all the experience, for all the bravado that made him the intimidator, Dale Earnhardt was not immune to physics. He was human, he was mortal, and the crash did not care about his legacy. But the world did, and what followed turned one final impact into a lifetime of lessons. Even as the shock of Dale Earnhardt's death faded, the reality remained. NASCAR had to rebuild trust with both drivers and fans. Transparency became key, with the sport releasing crash data and focusing on safety education. His passing sparked global safety discussions, leading to major changes not just in NASCAR, but across all motorsports. Earnhardt's legacy wasn't just about his championships, it was about the lives saved by improved safety measures, from better cars to new driver protections. No NASCAR driver has died on track since, and his impact continues to shape the sport. His death redefined what racing meant. It's not just speed, it's about survival, legacy, and learning from tragedy. Dale Earnhardt's final lap didn't just end an era, it saved lives and changed motorsports forever. His legacy lives on, not only in the sport but in the lives of those who continue to race safely because of him. If this story meant something to you, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. More stories like this are coming, because legends never disappear. They leave behind a legacy that keeps driving forward.